Okay, so here's the thing. I need to make a couple of quick character animations for a project. And even though animation has always been an intensive process, it's actually never been easier to find a program that you like and to start animating. My personal art app of choice is Procreate on the iPad Pro. Procreate dipped their feet into moving pictures in the past with things like their built-in time-lapse replays. But after some recent updates, the most basic of animation tools have been integrated. Now, there are other apps on the iPad that offer more animation-centric tools, like Rough Animator, but to me there's a lot of value in being able to use the tools that you're comfortable with when making still images. So it got me thinking, what if I challenged myself to create an entire frame-by-frame character animation in Procreate and showed you how? First things first, what I need is a character, something of a background extra who's going to be on a loop. It's supposed to be a little blacksmith who's working at an anvil. Think Tony Stark in the first Iron Man. Now, I don't have a character design yet, but other than a few features that would be nice to have, I want to keep this character simple. They're going to show up pretty small in the final scene, and everything you add to a design in complexity is something you're going to have to redraw. I went from lion to bear to rhino to bear, lion, hog. I wanted to give the opportunity for some secondary animation with his glasses, maybe jostling around in reaction to the hammer hitting. Secondary animation, like its name suggests, is any smaller movement that maybe happens as a result of the main action. Now, because I already have the main scene made that this blacksmith is going into, I knew what perspective the anvil is supposed to be in. So I started with that bounding box and drew out the anvil. The anvil isn't going to move at all. Using different colors on different layers allows you to easily modify what needs to move or change in the animation. Now, here's how animating in Procreate works. Every visible layer acts like a flipbook. If a layer is toggled on, it's treated like a frame of animation. That means if you want multiple layers to be visible in a frame, you'll need to group them or merge them. A group of layers will act the same as a single layer as far as Procreate's animation is concerned. The only things that I really need to move are the arm and a little bit of the head and eyebrows. I made a really good initial frame where, at the height of his swing, the whole body arced back and stretched, but full disclosure, that did not make it into the final product. This means that I can reuse the majority of the drawing and only redraw the arm and hammer, which I keep on another layer. To preview the animation in Procreate, head to Share, Animated GIF, and making sure that all the frames that you want in the animation are toggled to visible. Here you can adjust the amount of frames per second you want the animation to be. My animations will be 12 frames per second, or animated on 2s. The frame rate all comes down to how complicated and time-consuming you'd like your animation to be. More frames means smoother motion, but it also means more drawings. At this point I have a basic amount of motion, which is good. He goes from point A to point B with the hammer, but I want to improve the appeal of the animation. For that, I'm going to add some anticipation. Anticipation is the principle of animation where something is telegraphed ahead of time, a little wind-up or preamble to an action. This helps motion to not be so sudden or robotic. So I add some time at the top of his swing, as well as when the hammer is hitting the metal. Thinking through what's happening here, the hammer is really heavy. You're trying to make the strongest blow possible, but then once it hits, you want a tiny amount of rest. You don't just start right back up again. Now, I've also got the eyebrows going up a little with the hammer. I could have done this a little bit better, definitely, and the glasses bouncing and the body arcing would have all helped make this look cooler, but considering how small the final character will be, I'm just not super worried about it. The character also spends a lot more time lifting the hammer than dropping it, because of gravity, of course. The hitting animation is only a single frame smear that connects the action from the top of the swing to the bottom. Now, since it only appears for a fraction of a second, the smear looks like smooth motion. These smears have always been present in animation, either to help smooth something with a high frame rate, or to give the illusion of motion to a more limited animation. Now that I'm happy with the roughs, each frame being a group of layers, I duplicate my document and then flatten each layer. And this is where you may start to run into limitations with Procreate. Depending on your model of iPad and the resolution of your document, there are hard caps on the amount of layers that you can have. For 11 frames of animation, that only meant 11 layers. But now that we get into the cleanup, there will be multiple line art and color layers per frame, And even though it doesn't move, we need our anvil to be visible in every frame, so that means repeating it across every frame. I went a kind of complicated route because the anvil is rendered different, and there's objects like the body behind the anvil, and objects in front of it, like everything else. So I ended up making several layers per frame for line art and color. Next, I add color and color to the line art, which is another fairly tedious aspect. And at this point, I have a final animation, and I'm watching it through and fixing any little inconsistencies. The final animation is 11 frames long, but frames 1, 2, and 4 are all the same, so in the end it's really 9 unique drawings. This was a fun challenge, and obviously there are a lot of reasons why this process isn't ideal. There was a lot of repeated work to get around some of the limitations, and of course the fact that I was trying to make a looping animation and not a particular scene of action where something goes from point A to point B was actually helpful, as the GIF preview loops for you. Now there's definitely some things that I would do differently next time in order to make a better final product and streamline the process. Really, my insistence on keeping the anvil a separate prop is what ballooned this one into a more involved process. And in order to integrate the character into the scene, it's likely that I'll add some ambient lighting over top of the entirety of the animation instead of shading each individual frame, which can look off or bad if just one little thing is inconsistent. Of course, you could always import what you make in Procreate into other programs, but there was honestly just something fun about me challenging myself to do all of the work solely in my favorite art app. Now I can integrate my final character onto the background and repeat the process for the next few characters. And if you're wondering what project this is for, why don't you subscribe and stick around to see when I finish it, and I'll show it to you then. I'm making new videos every week on Character Design Forge. Subscribing lets you know when new videos are made available. You can keep my forge burning over on patreon.com/bageldenizen. My Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon are all bageldenizen, and you'll see them in a few seconds. Thank you for watching, and have fun creating.